You may not be a history buff. I'm kind of a history buff, not really. I just kind of like learning about it. One person that you may have heard about in history is named Corrie ten Boom. She and her family during World War II, they hid people from the Nazis. They took them into their homes and they hid them, took care of them, fed them. And in the process, though, they got found out. And Corrie ten Boom got sent to a concentration camp. But while she was there, she began to lead Bible studies, began to talk about Jesus in the middle of a concentration camp. And they, in the process, the place where she lived, the barracks where she was, became known something like the place where hope lived, in the middle of a concentration camp. Now, someone like this, we look at them and go, oh, they're amazing, they're great, and she did do great things. But we often ask, how? How do they do that? How do they keep going in trying situations? How do they keep living out their faith in trying situations? Well, the answer to that is probably something like faith. You know, faith is a thing that gets us through hard times. Because we have faith in something, we have faith in someone who can help us get through and continue to live the life God has for us, even in trying times. Today we're going to talk about faith. We're going to talk about what it takes to live out our life in trying times, and what it takes to do great things for Jesus. Previously, we talked about Jesus and his disciples heading up to Caesarea Philippi. Remember, as they were in the region, Jesus asked his disciples, who do people say that I am? And in the process, Peter said, well, you're the Messiah. And Jesus began to teach them what the Messiah really was. He wasn't a revolutionary. He was a suffering servant. Then he began to teach them what it means to follow that Messiah. How do you follow a suffering servant? And after that, he took 3 of his disciples up on a mountain. And in that process, those disciples saw a great thing, experienced a great thing. They experienced the transfiguration, where they saw Jesus in his glory there on the top of that mountain. Well, our story is going to pick up today with them coming down off the mountain. And we're going to see if they discovered a situation, they came upon a situation that was going to teach them something about faith. Look what happens when they come down off the mountain. When they came to the disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and scribes disputing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were amazed and ran to greet him. He asked them, what are you arguing about? So Jesus and the 3 are coming down off the mountain, and they come upon the other disciples who were in the middle of an argument with some religious leaders. And we don't know what the argument's about yet, but I think we're going to see in this next little bit, the argument was about what was going on around them. And they were experiencing a little trouble in their ministry, and they really weren't handling it quite the way Jesus would like them to handle it. So let's look and let's see what's going on. Look at Mark chapter 9, verse 17. Someone from the crowd answered him, Teacher, I brought my son to you. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him down, and he foams at the mouth, grinding his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive it out, but they couldn't. He replied to them, You unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring him to me. So they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, it immediately threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus says, what are you arguing about? What's going on here? And before anybody else could say anything, it's like the boy's father's thinking, finally, the teacher's here. Finally, he can do something. He begins to tell Jesus what's going on. You see, he had brought his boy to the disciples, and they couldn't do anything. They had tried to cast out the demon, but they couldn't do it. And before Jesus could really get into a long discussion, because this isn't the time for an exorcism lesson with the disciples, before he could get into an argument with the scribes, this wasn't a time to talk about methods. Jesus turns to faith. Before anything else, he just turns straight to the issue at hand, faith. When Jesus says here, you unbelieving generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? It was heard by the crowd, but it was probably meant for the disciples. You see, he had sent these guys out before. They had been successful in things just like this before. They had gone on a mission trip all by themselves. Jesus stayed home, and they had gone out in different groups, and they had cast out demons. They had healed people, and here they were now, and he'd been gone just a short little bit, but they couldn't do it. They couldn't do what needed to be done. Maybe there was some other stuff going on. We don't know, but they couldn't do what needed to be done. And Jesus says, I'm not going to be with you guys long. I'm on my way out of here. You got to learn how to do this yourself. Why couldn't they do it? Well, it's a faith issue. These guys didn't have the faith. They might have had the methods. They might have had the knowledge, the experience, the know-how, but they didn't have the faith to do what needed to be done. And Jesus says that is an issue. That is the issue in this situation. I want you to think about something. Like the disciples, believers today are commissioned to do ministry in their personal life and in conjunction with the church. But I want us to consider, what are the negative effects of doing ministry in our own power as opposed to power of the Spirit? Like the disciples, we have experience in ministry. We've done ministry before. We've led this event. We've taught this class. We've done these type of things. We have experience. Like the disciples, we have know-how. We can read books. We can read on the internet about how to do stuff, how to plan stuff, how to make this thing happen. We can get advice from people. We have experience. We have know-how. But when we try and do what God's called us to do in our experience, our know-how, our own strength, it's going to lead to the same results that we have in this situation. Frustrated people, arguments, faltering faith. That's what happens when we do stuff in our own strength, and that's what's going on with these people in this situation. But Jesus is on the scene. He walks up, and he sees this boy is in trouble. He's in need, and these people can't do anything about it. So he says, bring the boy to me. I'll take care of him. So they bring him up, and when the demon sees him, he begins to throw the boy on the ground. It's almost like he is initiating a showdown with Jesus. It's different than the other demon Jesus encountered, the one that had legion in him. It's a different situation. We don't really know why this demon is doing what he's doing. Maybe he's just trying to show his power. Maybe he's frustrated. I don't know. But he throws the boy down, and Jesus sees that the disciples can't do anything. The dad can't do anything. The leaders, the religious leaders can't do anything. So Jesus is going to do something. And we can know in our situations that we can confidently approach Jesus with all of life's challenges, even when those around us can't do anything with the situation. So it's going to become clear that Jesus is going to heal this boy. That's going to happen. But Mark is trying to teach us about faith when he writes about this story. So he's going to share some more details about what's going on and some of the conversations that were had. So let's keep trucking. Let's see what happens next. Look at Mark chapter 9, verse 21. How long has this been happening to him? Jesus asked the father. From childhood, he said, and many times it has thrown him into the fire or water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if I can, everything is possible for one who believes. Immediately the father of the boy cried out, I do believe. Help my unbelief. Desperation. That's what we see here. Desperation. When have you been desperate? Maybe it was a lighthearted event. Maybe you were low on gas in the middle of nowhere. You might have been getting a little desperate. Maybe it was more serious. Maybe you were facing a medical issue. Maybe you were waiting on someone in the hospital and you were desperate for answers, desperate to know what's going on. You know, there are times in life when you're desperate. I want us to take a moment. I want you to step into the shoes of this dad, shoes of his father, and think about how he might be desperate. Anyone who's had a child who is in trouble has experienced what it means to be desperate. In this situation, this father was desperate probably because it was a long-term illness. He'd been sick since he was a child. We don't know how old he is now, but he's been sick a long time. He's had this demon problem for a long time. He might be desperate because of the current situation. You know, he brought this boy to Jesus, but Jesus wasn't there. The disciples couldn't do anything. And the whole thing just turned into an argument with religious leaders. And almost like the boy and the father got pushed aside while people discussed probably theology and methodology and all this stuff. And he's just desperate. But Jesus is here. Jesus comes, and Jesus is concerned with the boy, and he says, tell me about him. What's going on? Give me a medical history so we can move forward. And so the man does. He gives Jesus a medical history and tells him about all this stuff that's been going on and how bad off the boy is. And after that, Jesus is standing there, and the man says, but if you can do anything, have compassion on us, help us. You know, we've seen a situation like this before. Somebody's come to Jesus, and they're having some trouble. This man had leprosy in the other story, and I want us to compare what he says to what this man says. So go back to Mark chapter 1, verse 40. Then a man with leprosy came to him, and on his knees begged him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. It's interesting. The leper knew Jesus could heal him, but he wasn't sure if Jesus wanted to heal him. He didn't know. But the father of the boy knew Jesus wanted to heal him, but he wasn't sure Jesus could heal him. He was lacking faith, and that faith may have been faltering because of the disciples' inability. They followed Jesus, they've done this before, and now they can't. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe this isn't possible. Maybe nobody can heal my son. Maybe the healer, maybe the teacher, he just can't. He wants to, but he has good intentions, but no, he can't do it. That's when Jesus points us to the issue of faith, the issue of belief. I don't know why God does this. God does things that we don't always understand, but for some reason, God wants to work, God can work in the life of people who believe. People who have faith. Now, faith isn't a magic potion. It's not something we can put in a bottle and pull out when we need it. We don't have faith in faith. We have faith in the one who can do all things. But it's interesting, Danny Akin writes this. He says, the key is not the depth of our faith, but the direction of our faith. What is important is not the potency of our faith, but the person our faith is in. A little faith in a great Savior gets amazing results. The man declares he believes, but he's unsure. You see, he's got a faith issue. He's just not quite there yet. So Jesus has to address his issues before he can address the son's issues. He has to look into the father's heart, and he has to help the father understand, help the father have more faith before he can deal with the son. You know, I find it interesting. Sometimes in life when we are seeking help for someone else, or we're praying about someone else's situation, or we're trying to help somebody else with the problem in their life, the Lord teaches us something. I want you to take a moment, and I want you to reflect on your life. When was a time when you were really concerned about somebody else, and you're really praying about somebody else's situation, you're really trying to help somebody out, but God took a moment to teach you something in the process? He taught you something about faith, or you something about your life while you were really trying to help somebody else. Just take a moment and consider that, and maybe even talk to the Lord about that for just a second. You know, sometimes we can be like this man. We can be a walking contradiction. We can believe and unbelieve and not believe at the same time. And God understands that. God understands that we are a work in process. He understands that about this man. He understands it about you and me. And he wants to help us and teach us. And like this group, he's moved them from a situation where they're arguing over methods and the situation, and moved them to a conversation about discipleship and faithful living. He wants to help us do that as well. I think in this little story, we can see that believers must admit their shortcomings when it comes to faith and trust Jesus to help them mature. He wants to help us grow. He wants to help this man grow. He's going to heal the boy, but he wants to help the people who are here at this time to grow in their faith in the process. So let's keep trucking. Let's see what happens to this boy next. Look at Mark chapter 9, verses 25 through 29. When Jesus saw that a crowd was quickly gathering, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, "You mute and deaf spirit, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again." Then it came out, shrieking and throwing him into terrible convulsions. The boy became like a corpse, so that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus, taking him by the hand, raised him and stood him up. After he had gone into the house, the disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he told them, "This kind can come out by nothing but prayer." Now, we see here another time where Mark shows us that Jesus is concerned with the crowds. Jesus doesn't like it. He doesn't want the crowds to constantly just be observing him and gawking at his miracles. Remember, one of the issues that we have in this day and age is that these people are expecting a revolutionary. They're expecting someone to come in and overthrow Rome. And Jesus doesn't want them to constantly be looking in that direction. So in this case, Jesus sees the crowd coming and gathering and being all around and ready to gawk and watch the spectacle. So Jesus, he casts out the boy and he moves on. And let's look more intently at what he wants to teach the disciples. What happens when they go into the house? After he had gone into the house, the disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" When we fail to do ministry well, when we fail at a project, whether it be at church or a situation in doing ministry with our family or leading our family or out in the community, when we fail at that, it provides us an opportunity to do a little introspection. to question what happened, what's going on here. And that's what the disciples are doing. They said, Jesus, why couldn't we do this? But I think in their question, we see a little bit of arrogance, a little bit of depending on their own power, because they had done this before. And they're like, what did we do wrong? Why couldn't we do this? What was wrong in our strength that this didn't happen? And Jesus is going to try and teach them a little bit about this. But again, I want us to take a moment. I want us to look at ourselves here. And I want you to consider, in what ways can we demonstrate the same kind of assumptions about our abilities and our strengths when doing ministry? Maybe you're responsible for a yearly activity at your church. Maybe it's a big outreach event at Easter or something in the fall, and you're responsible for planning that. And you've got the experience. You've got the know-how. You could plan your way to the moon if you needed to. But sometimes we depend on our experience and our past understandings in a situation instead of asking the Lord to reveal us new ideas and new ways of doing things and new purposes and new visions. Maybe every week you prepare a small group lesson for your group, and sometimes you can depend on your charisma. I can hold the group's attention. I can teach them this. I know this passage. It's fine. And maybe every week you can depend on your power, your strength, but really we need to depend on the Lord's fresh vision, fresh understanding of the Scripture, a new way to apply it to our people's lives. Maybe every year your church plans a church budget, and you look at last year's income receipts, you look at last year's expenditures, and you begin to plan for the new year. We can do that based on our experience and our knowledge and our understandings, but sometimes we need to stop and say, whoa, what does God want our church to do next year? What's God's plan for our budget? What's God's vision for us in the coming year? See, we can do all kinds of stuff in our own strength, but we need to depend on the Lord to give us what we need to do the ministry that He has before us. And so Jesus brings these guys in and they say, why couldn't we do it? And Jesus says, well, this kind of situation, it can only be fixed. It can only be addressed through prayer. Now, we need to understand that Jesus isn't saying, He's not saying that they need to pray longer, pray harder. Just pray more. You can do it. That's not what He's saying, because actually, if the issue was how they prayed and how long they prayed, that would be a contradiction to His requirement of faith. You see, the issue isn't how they prayed. The issue is that they could never cast out this demon on their own. Jesus is saying the answer to this problem comes from above. The answer to this situation for this boy, the answer for your budget problems, the answer for your life problems, they don't come through praying harder. They come from the one who you pray to. So Jesus is telling them, y'all, you never had the ability to do this. It only came from the Lord. Y'all are really trying too hard to do it on your own. And so Jesus is guiding them forward. Jesus is trying to help them understand what He wants to teach them. And I think for us to really grasp this, we need to go back to John chapter 15. Jesus tells the disciples, remain in me, and I in you. Just as a branch is unable to produce fruit by itself unless it remains in the vine, neither can you unless you remain in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in him produces much fruit, because you can do nothing without me. That's what Jesus is telling the disciples here. He says, for this period of time, you've detached yourself from the power source. You're trying to do it all on your own, but you've got to stay in me. You've got to depend on me, talk to me, pray to the Father, He will help us. He will make it possible for us to do the great things that we can do. Jesus will demonstrate His power in those kinds of prayers. Prayers of dependence, not prayers in our own strength. Prayers to Him to say, God, we can't do this. We've done things like this before, but we need you to do it again. We need you to do it again. This week, I want you to consider Mark chapter 9, verse 24. And I really want you to highlight those words, help my unbelief. I want you to consider carrying this card around with you this week. And when uncertainty arises, I want to challenge you to write a word or two that describes those challenges on the other side of the card and pray that God will help you to have faith in that very moment. Today, we've gone from a situation where there were some people arguing about methods and methodologies, and Jesus moved those people to a conversation about faith. He helped a father who knew Jesus had a desire to help him, but didn't know if Jesus could help him. And Jesus showed that Father, and Jesus shows us that Jesus wants to help us, and Jesus can help us in our situations. And then he told the disciples about their faith. He said, y'all, you're trying too hard to do things on your own. You need to rely on me. Today, I want you to consider as you head out your unbelief and your unwillingness to rely on the Father to do the work that needs to be done. Where do we need to rely on him more? And where do we need to ask him to help us in the areas that we are not believing well? I'll see you next week.